I go, ooh, really into this. It's like,
Well, welcome everybody. This is going to be an interesting one, another roundtable discussion where we talk about last Sunday's topic, which was, can we trust the New Testament? If you just happened upon this video, my name is Josh. I'm the associate pastor here at Byron Community Church, and for this week's discussion, I am joined by...
I'm Maya, and I'm the summer intern here at Byron Community Church, and I'm also part of the youth group.
my name is Ron Burns. I'm the treasurer here at Byron Community Church.
Very good. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for tuning in here. I can never say that word, tuning in. Very tricky. So I just want to remind you, just in case you didn't see the Testable Truth sermons, you can catch it here on the YouTube channel. But let me just summarize sort of what we covered last Sunday. In substance, the text of the New Testament is certain. The heart of Christianity, that Jesus died so that our sins could be forgiven, that Jesus was resurrected 3 days later and appeared to many witnesses, that dates back to the resurrection itself. It didn't evolve over time. The writings of the New Testament are early. They're written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, and many times, many times, those eyewitnesses are named very specifically with the implication that the original readers could speak with the eyewitnesses themselves. Now, the first question that I have, actually, this was one of Maya's, a really good question. Is it possible that something was left out of the New Testament? What do you think?
I believe that's truth. Things have been left out of the New Testament. There are many councils formed way back in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries that reviewed transcripts and writings and were deemed not to qualify. So I believe that, yes, that's true, that I think some things may have been left out of the New Testament because they weren't considered possibly accurate, or they couldn't find other transcripts or documentation to verify the consistency of what was written or said.
Sure, so that there may be other sources, but they weren't included in the New Testament for various reasons. I think, Maya, what you're getting at with your question here is there something that happened, something significant that isn't recorded in the New Testament?
Yeah, like, is it possible that while they were kind of reconstructing what they had picked out to write, is it possible that they maybe thought that this was important, but at the same time, they're like, maybe it's too far-fetched that people won't believe, or maybe it's something that we just shouldn't share? You know, is that a possibility?
Well, it's a very good question. I think what we see in the New Testament itself, first of all, I think that what we have in the New Testament is what we're supposed to have. That's what's in it. The New Testament itself actually says that they could fill lots and lots of books of the works and words of Jesus, but this is written so that you might believe, and it points back to Jesus being the Messiah, being crucified, being resurrected. So on the surface, are there things that were left out of the New Testament? Absolutely. There would have been more stuff that Jesus did that they just didn't write about. But in terms of things that were excluded or edited out, I don't think so. And I think we can see that in the New Testament itself, because they're writing, oftentimes, the disciples look kind of dumb. They do dumb things. They don't believe what Jesus is saying to them. Back in their day, women weren't even considered to be witnesses within the court, and yet they're pointing to women as significant eyewitnesses. They talk about some very significant things that Jesus said, things that are challenging. I think if they were going to edit things out, they probably would have edited some of those. You see Jesus even elevating the bar, right? He says, even if you look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery. He's raised the bar. So I think if they were going to edit anything out, they didn't do a very good job, because there's so many of these sayings, there's so many things that if you were trying to put the best possible tale together, you would probably want to make yourself look good. You would want to make Jesus make sense and appealing to everybody, and yet they keep his difficult sayings in. They keep some of the times where they are a little bit sketchy, we could say, or maybe they lack faith at times, but they keep all of that in. So I think what we have is a very accurate in the New Testament. I think what we have is what we're supposed to have. But this brings up sort of what, Ron, what you were just talking about, that there are other writings about Jesus. There are other gospels.
Right.
Some of you might be familiar with Dan Brown's work, and even the, who's in that, Tom Hanks, where they make the videos, Angels and Demons and
The Da Vinci Code.
the Da Vinci
Yeah.
Code, exactly. So there are other sources that are not included in the Bible. Why can't we trust those other sources like the Gospel of Mary or the Gospel of Thomas? How come those things are not part of the Bible, do you think?
Maybe it's due to the fact that they don't have enough people saying the same thing. Like maybe it's a point where, sure, the story generally is the same, but the details are too different from different people that they couldn't really make it factual, you know?
Sure,
That could be a possibility.
that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in the sense that the trust factor of the material, there may not be enough to justify the evidence that was being brought forward. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself from what I was saying in the beginning, but that's the case. I believe that the research was done to see whether these books qualified. And like you were saying, Josh, we see in the New Testament today, it's well into the 90% factor that we can trust what we read.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that there was a lot of research done to see whether or not these writings qualified, because over the years, the New Testament has been criticized, researched by so many sources as to the actual accuracy of what is in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly I believe that, the books that you're referencing, people much
Much smarter than
much
us.
smarter than I, or
Yeah.
educated than I, would have a better insight as to what is accurate.
For sure, and I think it goes back to sort of what we were talking about on Sunday, that what's in the New Testament is early. The manuscripts are early. It's written early. It's written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. These other so-called gospels or so-called writings, they're dated hundreds of years later. And so they're the exact opposite, like you're saying, Ron. When you begin to analyze them, they don't fit. They're not written early. They're not written with eyewitness testimony. And it's right when you would see legend beginning to develop, because you're looking at hundreds of years after Jesus, hundreds of years after any of those events themselves. And often they're written with agendas behind them when you actually read some of these lost gospels or excluded texts. And that's where you're getting real embellishments. I forget which one it is, maybe the secret gospel of Peter, maybe Thomas, I don't know, but it talks about, when Jesus comes out of the tomb, he's accompanied by two angels that stretch all the way up to the heavens, and Jesus comes out, and a cross comes out too. It's a giant cross, and the cross begins to talk. God says, "Have you preached to those who are asleep?" And the cross says, "Yes, I have preached to those who are asleep." It's just this weird concoction of legend and myth, which is what you would see if things are written hundreds of years later. So there are other things that are written, but I think they're excluded. As you say, Ron, the experts have analyzed it from the very beginning. Things that were written early, rooted in eyewitness testimony, that's included. Things that are written way, way later that don't match, as you're saying, Maya, that don't have the details, they're excluded. And I think they're excluded for very, very good reason. But what about all of the miracles in the New Testament? We can accept maybe that the text is certain in terms of substance, but for somebody out there who reads through the New Testament and there's all these miracles, Jesus is resurrected, he's resurrecting other people, he's walking on water, he's turning water into wine. How do we explain those?
Well, as you're saying, with it being in the New Testament, those miracles that were witnessed that Jesus had performed, there again, I would imagine that there had been numerous incidences of witnessing those miracles. If, let's say, you had one individual that so-called saw a miracle, if it was just one individual, that would be hard to confirm. But if there's numerous people involved that saw that, and it was recorded, then I would suppose you could have more faith in that it was more accurate than
Sure.
some other hearsays that said something, because you also have to question the person's motivation for saying that they witnessed Jesus performing a certain type of miracle.
Mm.
What's the motivation behind that?
Yeah, what are they getting from it?
What are they getting from it? Are they trying to bring themselves forward and giving themselves more of a exposure, or to me that would be something I was certainly wondering about.
What do you think, Maya?
I think the thing with miracles is that it's done in a way to prove that God is there and he's working through Jesus and he's greater than
Mhm.
all of us. So it's one of those things that you can't truly explain as a human. It's just something that it's kind of meant to grow your faith, because it
Sure.
happens and and it's through those stories that you believe that God can save us, that our sins are, we're redeemed from our sins.
Sure.
So I think instead of just trying to explain it, it's more about understanding why it happened,
Mm. And I think generally the purpose of Jesus performing the miracles is to validate who he said he was.
Right.
For me, to address the miracles of the New Testament, just go back to the first few words of the Bible. In the beginning, God. If that first statement is true, then anything after it is at least possible. If all the evidence points that an unknown agent intervened for causes of its own when we talk about the creation of earth and the creation of the universe, if in the beginning God, then walking on water is not that difficult. If God can create the universe and create us and create the earth, then multiplying some bread and some fish, piece of cake. I mean, if God exists and Jesus claimed to be God, then yeah, the miracles to me are not that difficult to explain if we can accept the first few words of Genesis. If in the beginning God, then the miracles in the New Testament are child's play, I think, in comparison. However, other people might point to magicians, like Chris Angel. Have you heard about him?
Yeah.
Have you heard of Chris Angel?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or Dynamo? Both have performed different variations of walking on water illusions. They've both turned water into alcohol. They do all sorts of different illusions. Couldn't Jesus just have been a magician like them?
Well, they certainly have the technology that Jesus didn't have back then. I'm not familiar with Dynamo, but anything I've seen with Chris Angel, I don't believe he mentions about having that power to perform magic without some sort of assistance through what his crew helps him with.
Sure.
But to me, I look at them as being completely different. That's strictly for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
The wow factor, when we talk about the miracles of Christ that he performed, like I was saying, that that's to show us that, Christ was unique, that Christ did have those powers. Those magicians you speak about, they're not trying to show us that. They're just trying to show us that they're very clever in how they can perform these feats of magic.
Sure. Maya, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think when you kept saying the word illusion, right? That's what magic is. It's to kind of hide the truth, to give the
Yeah.
entertainment, like Ron was saying.
Yeah.
Whereas Jesus did it on a whim. Like, it wasn't planned, it wasn't premeditated. It was there in the moment. He was saving people's lives because they needed help desperately. He
Mhm.
wasn't doing it to put on a show. He was doing it because it was a necessity. Like, he had to do it to help people out. And so I think Jesus can't be considered a magician because magic and miracles are so different. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's so much proof against Jesus being a magician that he
Sure.
is a miracle worker.
Mhm.
Of course, we can speak of Chris Angel and Dynamo, but we all know that the greatest magician is Ray Anderson at coolmagician.com. Hi, Ray. But sometimes critics don't just point to magicians like Ray Anderson at coolmagician.com. They point out to people who aren't doing it for entertainment. They're not doing it to sell tickets to a show. They'll point to other modern day god men. Satya Sai Baba, for example. And I know you guys have heard of him because I showed you clips before we sat down.
That's true.
But he performed wonders, and he developed a large following of believers, and he taught, and he preached. And people say, well, look at Satya Sai Baba. That's exactly what happened with Jesus. He performed some miracles that gullible people bought into. They wanted to believe it desperately enough, so they followed him. Jesus is just like Satya Sai Baba. What do we say to that?
I say that's not accurate at all because, as we were talking about before, Satya Sai Baba predicted his death, that he would die at 96 and he would be in perfect health up until that point. Well, then he told us that he was confined to a wheelchair for the last decade of his life and he died in his 80s. So that right there kind of shows you that
It's a pretty big swing and a miss.
yeah,
Yeah.
this man was not a reincarnate of an Indian god that he said he was. I don't think. That's my personal beliefs. Jesus has all the proof to back him up. You have many, many books in the Bible talking about all the things he's done. He had thousands of people watching him. You have so many eyewitness accounts that it's just more believable, I think.
Sure. What do you think, Ron?
Well, that person you spoke of, like you were saying, you told us who he was because I'd never heard of him before. But there again, like we were saying, Jesus' miracles have been examined and critiqued for centuries. This person, I'm assuming, lived fairly recently within this century.
Mm-hmm.
From what you told me, I don't see any true evidence of this person having special powers. Like you're saying, he predicted his death. Well, you read the New Testament, and Christ also made certain predictions, but they were pretty accurate about what
Mhm.
he was saying.
Even as we talked about the temple being
That's
the
right.
destruction of the temple.
So to compare the two, pretty extreme to say that this individual has these extraordinary powers.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely a stretch.
it is a
Um,
stretch.
It's a comparison that gets made quite often if you watch different debates and things, and often critics or they would point and say, yeah, look at Satya Sai Baba, that's just modern day Jesus. And I guess to an extent, they maybe have a point in that, this guy is doing, pretty much he has three tricks. He does ash production. Well, he does that two different ways, but they're different. And he produces things from his mouth using an egg bag. But those are basically his three tricks, and he's built a following doing that. I think the big thing is anybody that can watch that, and you can because he's modern day, so you can see the clips on YouTube. Nobody is impressed by that. Everybody knows how he's doing it, and his message hasn't spread. People don't know who he is. He may have followers that, for whatever reason, want to believe him or maybe are desperate enough to need that, but that message hasn't spread. Nobody has felt the need to go preach about Satya Sai Baba. So I think, certainly there's other modern-day people that are trying to build a following, but I don't think they compare to Jesus in any way.
Well, they don't, because we're talking about Jesus living 2,000 years ago. For me, something that's lasted that long, there has to be some substance to it,
Mm-hmm.
because like we were talking about, the New Testament's been examined and re-examined in so many times with so many theologians, people who don't believe, and it has spread globally. The
Mhm.
message of Christ has spread globally. So, to me, that's a very strong message that what you're reading in the New Testament is real. And I know it was talked about before that the disciples, their reaction once Christ was crucified and then afterwards what they did was
Mhm.
amazing, because they were terrified.
Absolutely.
They were afraid for their lives. But then they went out there, made incredible sacrifices, spreading the news of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's a strong indication that what we're reading about really did take place.
Yeah, that's a strong piece of evidence to go from people who have abandoned Jesus, which we read about, right? When he's being arrested, they deny him, they abandon him. After he's dead, they're scared that they're going to be next. And then something happens and they completely switch. And they're motivated to go to the ends of the world that they know,
Absolutely.
to spread that message. Even as we talked about on Sunday briefly, they face pretty horrific deaths, and none of them recant. None of them take the story back to try to avoid it. They keep moving the message forward. And when it comes to those other people like, say, Bob, that's not happening. It's just not happening. So I don't think you can compare the two. This might be a shorter conversation, but our mini-series has come to an end. That's our 3 weeks. We talked about, is there a creator? Is there a God? Can Christians believe in evolution? Are humans exceptional or special? Can we trust the New Testament? If we were to do another mini Testable Truth series, what topics would you like to see discussed?
The big one I want to discuss and I'd like to hear about is what God says in the Bible about women, and specifically women being in a position in the church, say pastoral, whatever that looks like, what the Bible says about that. Because I know there's many different views out there, so.
Sure. That's a good question.
There's a couple that I was thinking of. The relationship of wealth versus poverty. For example, for Christians, how do we respond to the poor? Because
Sure.
certainly today, with the way the economy is, there are a lot of people struggling. So to me, I think that's a topic that would be very important for all of us to examine, to see how we as Christians should be responding. Because certainly for the church, that's a good field to take big leadership in,
Absolutely.
to help the poor, because we know this is not going to go away, and it's something that we really need to deal with. Another one I was thinking of too was topic of war. How are Christians supposed to respond to war?
Very relevant right
That's
now.
very relevant with Ukraine, right? So that's another topic I think would be very interesting for us to deal with. What is our reaction? Should we completely ignore it? If, let's say, there was a conflict, should we try to remove ourselves from it? Should we get involved, such as maybe
Sure.
as being a combatant? I remember there was a fellow who went to our church who did fight in the Second World War, and he really struggled with his faith because of what he did. So I think that's a topic that would be, very interesting to examine.
Yeah, very interesting, very challenging, both all of those questions. For me, one of the ones that I kind of wanted to do was Little Green Men and Lights in the Sky. How do Christians respond to the question of UFOs and aliens, and what about ghosts? What about Santa Claus? A lot of Christians seem to really want to ignore Santa, but I think he could be a real advantage in how we approach Christmas. So how does that fit? I think there's lots of different things. I liked your question. I did mention my grandmother, who was a great pastor back in her day. Let us know if this is something that you'd like us to continue to do, or maybe re-examine again down the road. What testable truth questions do you have? What topics would you like to explore? What kinds of questions are your friends or neighbors or family members asking you, but you're not sure how to give a biblically accurate and compelling answer. Let us know. You can email us or just let anybody know. And maybe next time we'll get to do another testable truth in the near future, and we can come back to the round table. We'll see what happens. This has been a little experiment over the last 3 weeks. My thanks to Ron and Maya, and of course Patrick, who was with us for the first 2. And we'll see where it goes. If we want to continue to do roundtable discussions into the future, you let us know. Give us a like, give us a share, and subscribe. Thank you all very much for coming this morning.
Thank you, Josh.
With our Tim Hortons coffee.
Yep.
Actually, it's just water. But if, say, Baba was here, maybe he could turn it into coffee.
Turn it into coffee,
Yeah.
maybe. Or the dust.
Oh, we're going to get in trouble. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. This Sunday, Pastor John is back. And I have
Yes.
no idea what we're doing. But it's going to be good. We'll see you then.